to the Work Wonders podcast, brought to you by Asta HR, where we simplify the human side of business. I'm Angela.
And I'm Susan. Let's dive into today's episode and find out what you've been wondering about.
In today's episode, we're going to be discussing the Respect at Work legislation that happened to come into play in December 2022. We're going to talk about what it is, what it means for your business, and where you can start. So let's get started. This is the Work Wonders podcast.
Hi, Angela.
Hi there, Susan. How you going?
I'm going well.
Good. So today we're talking about the Respect at Work legislation. A few months late, but it is a big topic and there's been lots of legislation coming into play.
Yeah, it affects a lot of instruments that are already in place and makes those changes that you might not really be aware of, but are important for you to know about if you're an employer.
So I might take our listeners back a few steps and let's start by talking about a little bit of the history of where it came from. So back in 2018, there was a national survey around sexual harassment in the workplace. There were some really interesting statistics that came from that. I'll share those with you. 1 in 3 of people that were interviewed had been sexually harassed in the workplace in that 5 years previous to that. More than 2/3, so 69% of people, had witnessed a sexual harassment act of some kind and didn't intervene.
Okay.
It's overwhelmingly majority. And less than 1 in 5, so 17%, made a formal report or a complaint about an activity or sexual harassment that they've experienced.
So you're basically saying, based on that first statistic, which was 1/3 of people, yeah?
1 in 3, yes. So 39% of women and 26% were men.
Right. So that's more than 1 in 3 for women. So 39, how's the sums going? Less than half are getting reported, or around half.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So it's definitely prevalent. That was one of the things that sort of came up that led into this. Then in 2020, there was a national inquiry, and that's where these recommendations were developed for what they recommended employers should be doing.
Yeah. And I was only going to say the previous government, I think, decided to follow through on a handful of those recommendations. And then when there was a change of government, the current government said, we're going to implement everything.
Yeah.
Now, everything is a lot.
Yes, there's quite a few.
Yeah.
We're not going to overwhelm you today. We just want to talk about the main points that are important to know about right away.
Yeah. So, and we'll be giving you some definitions because, we don't want to get too technical, but you do need to know what constitutes, for example, sexual harassment in the workplace and positive duty and things like
Absolutely. Well, on that, that's one of the biggest things that has changed. So if we think of, well, we've had, don't want sexual harassment in the workplace for a while, but what has changed? Where have these recommendations taken us to? Positive duty is one of the biggest ones.
I think it is.
Yeah. Do you want to explain that?
So in the past, I'm sure most businesses would have policies around sexual harassment. They might have conducted some training. But now there's really the onus on you to prove that you've done everything that you can reasonably to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. And then the second part of that is, having done all that or not done all that, if sexual harassment occurs in the workplace, you've got to be able to show
what you've done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Otherwise you'll be held liable and responsible.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's all preventative measures rather than reacting to something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Much more proactive approach is expected.
Okay. Talking there about compliance as well, you've been required to sort of show what you've done. There's much more of an onus there for employers now around enforcing that compliance. So you're right, they can be asked, what have you done up until this point? To prevent these sort of things from happening. So there should be actions happening well before a suspected event might be happening of sexual harassment. Yeah.
So there's a number of laws, both at federal and state and territory level, that are impacted or adjusted or play into this whole requirement and your compliance. So the Sex Discrimination Act, the Commonwealth one, most of the states have similar legislation around anti-discrimination and human rights. There's a Fair Work Act. Of course, work health and safety, and can be workers' compensation laws, and in serious cases, of course, it's going to criminal law.
Yeah.
You know. So it's quite a lot to get your head around, but don't worry.
Don't worry. Yes,
We're here to give you the main points. And I think one good place to start would be by defining what we're talking about when we say sexual harassment, right?
Yeah.
Under Australian law, sexual harassment occurs when a person makes an unwelcome sexual advance or unwelcome request for sexual favours to another person. So that's sexually harassing that person. But it can also be engaging in other unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature in relation to that person who is then considered to be harassed.
Okay.
So there is a long list of what those things mean. But the key things are that the conduct is of a sexual nature, that it's unwelcome, and thirdly, and this is important, that a reasonable person would anticipate the possibility of causing offence, humiliation or intimidation.
Okay.
So that's
where
the
the
thing.
harassment
That's the
comes in.
test, really, yeah.
Okay.
So back in the day, a lot of things that people my age took, just brushed off in the
Took on
workplace.
the chin.
Yeah, exactly. Now would be classified as sexual harassment. So if you're a person of a certain generation, you probably need to understand this a bit better.
So it's the employer's obligation to provide an environment that doesn't have a hostile nature to it. So what do we mean by that? So things that, like you've just said there, sexual harassment, that should not be present in the workplace. But it's also things that are of a sexual
nature, I think.
So, yeah, sex-based sort of things, whether it be talking over someone or thinking less of them or that sort of thing because of their gender.
Treating them differently.
Yeah.
That is interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes people aren't aware of that.
No, I think that's something that might be quite ingrained in some people, and it's very, not always at front of mind. So, yeah, it's good to stop and take stock and think of the way that might be happening in your culture.
Exactly. And, whether there are things that are going on in the workplace that you've accepted as being normal and okay, the old example of, the boss gives the staff member a shoulder rub because they're looking a bit harassed.
Yeah.
Harassed is not the right word to use there. They're looking hassled is what I meant, or stressed. Even just touching somebody anywhere on their body, if that person doesn't feel that's appropriate or isn't comfortable with that happening, then that's sexual harassment.
Yeah.
Are you feeling overwhelmed by all the things that you need to do to manage people in your business? We've got changes to legislation, different generations in the workplace, managing the expectations of the people that you employ. Why not hand all that over to the experts and get on with what you do best? The experienced team at Asta HR can quickly give you the advice that you need and get you headed in the right direction. With our HR support and coaching for you with managing people, it all becomes so much simpler. Schedule your free call today at astrahr.com.au. Now let's get back to the episode.
Really what it comes down to is we want to provide a workplace that's psychologically safe. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what does that mean?
Well, it's about having a culture that allows people to feel safe to bring up concerns and talk openly about these sort of things.
That is going to be very important.
And even more so because of the positive duty now that aligns with or rests with an employer. So some of the things that they could do to achieve that safe reporting environment, a zero tolerance policy. So having a stance that, no, we don't accept it at all.
And you don't have a choice about that, I have to say. If you're an employer now under these conditions, you don't have a choice.
Yeah. I think it would also be important that people feel that reports are being taken seriously. So if there's evidence, if you like, or if they know because of the behaviour of, let's say, management or owners of the business that, if a report is received, it's taken seriously. So you don't laugh it off. You don't go, oh, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. They didn't mean that. Actually treating that with some respect and going through a formal process and maybe standardising that process.
Yeah, exactly. So that people know, one, that they can approach, and 2, that when they do, that something will be done about it. Yeah.
And that's another thing. I guess they want to know that something that's going to be done about it is not going to lead them to be more victimised. I think it's fearful for people to think, well, if I go and complain or make a noise about something that's happened, am I then going to be brought to account or someone's going to make more of a deal about it with me, or perhaps the perpetrator will do it again, or whatever. So having consideration to make sure they're not further victimised.
And that victimisation can also be along the lines of, well, this person's a nuisance because they complain. So we sort of sideline them, or we find a way to work them out of the business. Any of those things that Angela and I have just spoken about is, again, against what the expectations are with respect at work.
And my last thought was the consequences for the person. If there's a report about, so-and-so has done something and then it's found that that was true, there needs to be consequences for that person. And it might be a little taboo to say, but no matter the level of their position. So if you're a manager or a senior manager, whatever it is, you don't get special treatment just because you're a manager. It doesn't get swept under the rug because of that. Everyone's treated equally.
I think I would argue that, justice needs to be seen to be done sort of thing. Yeah. Not that, you want anyone to be made an example of, but you do want to show that as the business owner or senior manager that you are doing the right thing in terms of what we're talking about. So sorry to interrupt,
no, go ahead.
But it just occurred to me, you could be running the training, having the policies, but for whatever reason, your staff don't feel comfortable coming to you to tell you about a situation, but are more comfortable going to Fair Work or the anti-discrimination.
Right.
So this is imperative then that your culture is one where people know that it's okay to speak up if they either experience or witness something that's not right.
Yeah.
I think I also wanted to mention that we're talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, but the workplace isn't just at your desk or while you're working. So it could be in the tea room having a coffee. It could be at drinks after work. That's an extension of the workplace under WHS legislation. But it also applies to other people coming into your workplace.
Right. So visitors, contractors, customers.
If you have had a client come in and they're harassing your staff and you let that go, you don't want to upset the client or whatever, and then that staff member makes a complaint because they're being sexually harassed by one of your customers, we're back to that positive, what was the word?
Positive duty.
Positive duty, thank you, yes.
So zero tolerance, not just amongst employees, but zero tolerance whatsoever. So it comes back to culture then, doesn't it, really? It's about embedding this into the way that you operate as a team, as a business. This is part of what you do. Your values are, we don't allow that. This is a safe place for our people to work.
So if you've got a value in your core values that is respect.
Yes, hello.
You better be, hello. This is a good place to start.
And not just cultures, but subcultures as well. So if you think about what I mean by that is, if you've got a team that's in Sydney but also a team that's in Melbourne, Melbourne might have a different culture to Sydney, or you might have, some casual staff that work of an evening and they might have their own little subculture in amongst the greater big culture.
Yeah, exactly. And that just reminded me also of keeping an eye on different locales, different sections of your business. Like, if you've got a young kid in the warehouse who likes to look at porn during the lunch break or, has pictures on the wall, that was terrible stereotyping. But, but there is a point to my example, because you may have a young salesperson have to go out into the warehouse for something and see that, and they'll feel, that this is sexual harassment to them, even though you haven't thought of that scenario. So I guess part of it is really thinking through, well, where are we at risk?
Yeah.
Doing a bit of an assessment.
And if I can take it back to the compliance issue, that this is, a positive duty for an employer. We need to be doing as much as we can before the event. to prevent it from happening, the Commission now have new powers to be able to come in and say to your business, what have you done? Okay, this has happened and this is a problem. Come and show me all the things that you've done under positive duty that should have prevented this from working. And if you've got from happening, and if you don't have anything to prove, you've done nothing, you've just got a policy and, that's about it, then that's not going to look very, very highly for you.
No. So what do we need to do as a bare minimum, do you think?
Well, I think policy is definitely important. Yeah. I think that's where I would start if we're thinking, the next steps of where you would.
And there needs to be some sort of awareness with all of your staff.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But particularly the leadership.
Particularly those, because they will have a different role to play, not just as an employee themselves, but also looking after a team potentially themselves as well. Discuss it with your team. Yeah. I think is important. So just, hey, this legislation has come about. This is our policy on sexual harassment. We have a zero tolerance to it and so on.
And one of the things when you're having those discussions with staff, I think it's really important to point out to them what sexualised behaviours and sex-based discrimination and harassment is.
Yes, absolutely.
Give them real-life examples, even things that you've noticed already that happen, so that people are very clear on what it means and what's prohibited.
And whilst it might be easy to think, oh, good, we'll just do some sexual harassment training and we'll have someone come in and do that and there you go, that's job done. Surely we've done enough. That's probably a fairly the first thing that some people might think of to sort of solve this problem. But I would encourage you to think otherwise. I
was going to say, I can't imagine that's going to stand up in court.
No, I don't think so. I think, like we've suggested here, to think back to your own values of your organisation, think about your own culture and talk about it more, whether it's surveying staff or just talking about it with them so they know what the procedure is. Bring it always back to your values and the work health and safety aspect if you're feeling unsure, and I think that's the best place to come at it from.
Yeah, totally agree. So, respect at work and the positive duty on employers. We covered a lot in this episode, and we'll be putting links to some resources in the show notes. You may be feeling a bit overwhelmed at the moment, but you just have to start with one thing. Don't feel you have to do it all at once. Just make sure you think of where's this one point we can start now and get some progress towards where we want to be.
Thanks for listening to the Work Wonders podcast, brought to you by Asta HR. Hit the subscribe button now to never miss an episode. And if you'd like to continue the conversation with us, you can find us over at astahr.com.au. See you in the next episode.